You won't co-sign your grandson's loan? Then don't expect to stay here much longer. That's what my daughter, Marissa, told me as she stood in the middle of the kitchen, a spatula in one hand and her voice sharp as vinegar. I didn't answer right away. Not because I had no words, but because at 74 I've learned that silence can sometimes weigh more than an argument. I held a dish towel, still warm from drying plates. Evan had just left the room, sneakers squeaking against the laminate floor as he stormed out. The air still carried the echo of his impatience. It's just a formality, Grandma. I've got steady work. I'm not asking you for money. But it wasn't just a formality. I'd been inside that bank branch before. I knew what it meant to co-sign for a 21-year-old who could barely keep a checking account from sliding into the red. I raised him better than this, Marissa muttered, shoving a pan into the sink, water splashing up the sides. You know he needs a car for his job. He's trying, but I guess trying isn't enough for you. I folded the towel carefully in half. He's young. He has time. He can take the bus a while longer. She turned quickly, eyes flashing. We took you in, didn't we? After your surgery, we rearranged everything. That back room could have been my office, but we made space for you. It was true. After my hip replacement, stairs had become too dangerous, and they had made space. I had been grateful, at least I thought so, until that moment. Don't think you can just sit here and not be part of this family, she added, quieter now. I looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't the little girl whose hair I used to braid. She was a weary woman with a mortgage, a full-time job, and a son still untouched by responsibility. But I wasn't just an extension of their needs. I was a person, and my signature was not free. That night I lay in bed, shadows stretching long across the ceiling. My body ached not from age, but from the weight of knowing I no longer fit. Somewhere between her sharp words and his eager demands, something in me shifted. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Around midnight, the lamp on my nightstand flickered once, then went out. At first, I thought it was a blown fuse. I checked the cord, the outlet. Nothing. The rest of the house glowed softly, the hallway light, the pale blue flicker of the television. Only my room was dark. I lay there with eyes wide open, the silence in the house colder than the draft slipping through the poorly sealed window. I tried the lamp switch again. Once, twice. Still nothing. I pulled on my robe, shuffled across the floor in wool socks, and opened the door just enough to see the hallway. Light, soft and golden, glowed steadily. Everything else worked. I stood there for a long moment before closing the door again. The darkness wasn't an accident. The next morning, no one mentioned it. Evan was already gone when I stepped into the kitchen. Marissa stood at the counter, sipping coffee and scrolling on her phone. Good morning, I said. She nodded without looking up. I filled the kettle, reached for my teacup, and stood in silence beside her. The kind of silence that presses at your temples. My lamp didn't work last night, I said quietly, not accusing, just stating. She shrugged, still staring at the screen. Maybe something tripped. Everything else was fine. Another shrug. Then, after a pause, you'll have to ask Evan. He was messing with the breakers the other day. I let it go. I stirred my tea at the far end of the table, spoon clinking against porcelain like a slow ticking clock. I could have pressed the issue, but pressing would only make me the problem, the reason the house felt heavy. The burden. And I'd had enough of wearing that role. Later that afternoon, I checked the breaker box myself. Everything was perfect. Every switch in place, no wires disturbed, the panel humming steady. The next night, it was the outlet. My heating pad, my only comfort when my hip throbbed, wouldn't power on. I tried one socket, then another. Dead. In the hallway, it worked just fine. It was subtle. A quiet erosion, not an argument. No raised voices. No locked doors. Just small pieces of comfort stripped away, one at a time. I didn't speak of it again. Not the lamp, not the outlet. I went through my days as if nothing had shifted, folding towels, feeding the cat, answering Evan's distracted greetings with polite nods. But at night, I sat in that dim room, lamp lifeless, outlets cold, and felt the weight of a message they didn't dare speak aloud. You are no longer welcome here. It's a strange realization when your presence shifts from needed to merely tolerated. You grow careful with every movement, quiet with every breath. You stop asking questions because each one feels like a complaint. Words themselves become intrusions, ripples against the rhythm of their lives. After dinner, I often sat by the window, gazing out at the crescent street where other homes hummed with life. Porch lights glowed, cars pulled in after long days, neighbors carried groceries, walked their dogs, exchanged soft words on doorsteps before vanishing behind curtains that fell gently, never like doors closing in anger. I found myself imagining what it might be like to live in a place where a disagreement didn't dim the lights. That's when the thought appeared. Quiet, hesitant, but insistent, you could leave. It stayed with me through the night as I lay under an extra blanket wishing for warmth. It wasn't born of anger or revenge. It was breath, the kind you draw when you've been under too long and finally rise for air. Leave. I didn't have much. A modest pension check, a small savings account that Julian and I had opened years ago before he passed. But it was something. Enough for a small space, something quiet, something that belonged to me. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not long, not deeply, but without waking at the sound of someone else's footsteps or the flick of a light switch. The idea had taken root, and with it came peace. Tomorrow, I told myself I would call the bank, not to plead for a loan or permission, but simply to ask how much of my life was still mine to decide. The teller's voice was practiced and calm, the kind designed to soften bad news. Yes, Mrs. Hale, your account is active. Would you like me to go over your current balance? I sat on the edge of the guest bed, my bed, gripping the cordless phone until my hand ached. I stared at the unplugged lamp in the corner and whispered, "Yes, please." She read out the number. It wasn't large, but it was mine. I thanked her and hung up, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from possibility. Later, I sat at the kitchen table across from Marissa, who typed on her laptop with one earbud in. The clatter of keys and faint hum of a podcast filled the space between us. I waited. Eventually, she sighed, pulled out the earbud, and looked up. Something wrong. I hesitated. Do you remember that small trust account Julian and I opened? For emergencies. Her eyes narrowed. The one you said you'd never touch? Yes. I think I might use it. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. For what? I haven't decided, I said softly, stirring my tea. But it's time I start making plans. She frowned. Mom, if this is about the loan, it's not. I met her eyes. It's about space. I don't feel like I belong here anymore. Silence fell again, heavy and sharp. You're overreacting, she said at last. It's been a rough month. You're taking things too personally. I nodded, though I knew better. The rest of the week passed under a brutal civility. I folded laundry, refilled the bird feeder, kept to myself. Evan barely spoke, except once to ask if I'd seen his car keys. I hadn't. He muttered something as he walked away, but I let it pass. On Thursday morning, I walked 4 blocks to the library, sat at a computer near the window, and opened the rental listings. Studios, senior communities, 1-bedrooms, anything under 900. Most were too far or too rundown to trust. But one caught my eye, a small 1-bedroom on Ravenwood Lane. A porch, a shared garden, no stairs, utilities included. I printed the page, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my purse as if it were something sacred. Back home, I placed the paper on my nightstand beside the dead lamp. That evening, as I chopped onions for dinner, Marissa lingered nearby, sipping wine. The kitchen filled with the scent of garlic and something sweet simmering on the stove. You know, she said lightly, I talked to Heaven. He's still upset. I kept chopping. He just feels rejected, I guess. By you. I nodded. He'll get over it. She hesitated, then added, well, maybe he wouldn't feel that way if you hadn't been so quick to shut him down. I set the knife aside. I didn't shut him down. I protected myself. She rolled her eyes. He's family. Isn't that what family's for? To sign for loans they can't afford? To sit quietly while their room goes dark at night? I met her gaze. Is that your version of family? The words lingered between us like smoke. She didn't reply. She lifted her glass and walked away. That night, I dialed the number from the listing. A gentle voice answered. "This is Nara." The place was still available. Nara said I could come see it Monday morning. I thanked her, heart racing, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted. After hanging up, I looked around the room. My room. The dresser I'd polished, the curtains I'd hemmed to keep out the summer heat, none of it was mine. I had borrowed this space out of necessity. Now I needed something different. Something Marissa could never give me, no matter how neatly the sheets were folded or how carefully she sliced my fruit. Peace. Monday would come soon, and with it, a chance to see that little home on Ravenwood Lane. I didn't know yet if I would take it, but I knew I needed to stand inside a room without wondering when the lights might be cut again. On Saturday, while no one was home, I quietly sorted through my belongings. In the bottom drawer of the old dresser, the one Marissa had once promised to replace, but never did, I kept a hidden folder buried beneath scarves. Inside were papers untouched for years, Julian's death certificate, the deed to our first house, a handful of faded photographs, and a small cream-colored envelope marked for later in his handwriting. I didn't open it. I already knew what it contained, his final note, written from the hospital bed the night before he passed. I'd read it once, and it hollowed me out. I didn't need to read it again. I only needed to feel its weight in my hands. I set the folder gently on the bed and turned to the closet. My wardrobe was modest. A few cardigans, 2 dresses fit for church or a holiday, slippers, and my old coat with worn cuffs I could never part with. I took mental inventory, counting how many boxes my life would require. 4, maybe 5 at most. Strange how decades of living could be reduced to a trunk's worth of fabric and paper. Strange and, in its own way, liberating. That evening, I sat in the backyard wrapped in a shawl, watching the sky fade violet behind the neighbors' rooftops. Through the open kitchen window, I heard Marissa's voice on the phone. "She's been acting odd," she said. "Like she's planning something but won't admit it. You know how she gets." A pause. "No, I didn't bring up the loan again." "What's the point?" She made herself clear. Another pause, longer this time. Then softer, almost resentful. She should be grateful. We took her in. I rearranged my life. I made room. I looked down at my hands, knotted, veined, palms roughened by years of dishes and garden soil. Once those same hands had cooled her fevered forehead, zipped her dresses, tied her shoes. Had she forgotten? Or had I simply overestimated the weight of those gestures? I rose slowly, knee stiff, and slipped back inside without a word. The next morning, I took the early bus downtown. I wore my good shoes, the navy pair with the low heels, and carried a notepad in my purse. I wanted to appear capable, someone who still decided her own path. Nara met me at the door of the Ravenwood house with a clipboard and a gentle smile. She was younger by at least 2 decades, maybe more, but her eyes were kind and her voice steady. The place was smaller than I had imagined. A compact living room, a narrow galley kitchen, a bedroom just wide enough for a single bed and dresser. Yet it was bright. The floors were polished, the windows generous. Wind chimes swayed softly on the porch, and a sliver of garden stretched behind the building. "This is the last available unit," Nara said as she led me through. "Most of the residents here are widows. It's quiet, safe. The landlord lives right next door, so if you ever need help," she smiled again. Not the kind of smile people give when they're eager for you to leave. A genuine smile. I nodded. "It's peaceful." And it was. Only then did I realize how noisy Marissa's house had grown, televisions humming, doors slamming upstairs, voices strained with unspoken tension. Here, there was only quiet. I filled out the application on the spot with Nara's pen. When I handed it back, she glanced over the form. "We'll process this by the end of the week. If everything checks out, the place is yours." My heart leapt. I thanked her, clutching the copy of the form and the small pamphlet she gave me about the community garden. "You can plant something if you like," she said. "Most of the women do." I smiled faintly. Maybe tomatoes. Or lavender. When I returned that afternoon, no one seemed to notice I'd been gone. Evan tinkered with something in the garage, muttering at tools, while Marissa was out grocery shopping. I slipped into my room, placed the lease packet in the drawer, and sat on the edge of the bed. Something had shifted, not in them, but in me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be noticed. I wasn't hoping for kindness or for the past to return. I was making plans. Soon, I would no longer be a guest in someone else's house. I would be a woman with her own space, her own warmth, her own light, and her own keys. That's when Evan knocked once before pushing my door open. "No, Grandma. No. May I come in?" The sound of Evan's knuckles brushing the wood, the faint click of the handle, it was less a question than a declaration. I looked up from my crossword, pencils still balanced between my fingers. "Can we talk?" he asked, already stepping across the threshold. His cologne struck me as sharp, though maybe it was simply that my senses had grown keener with age. "Of course," I said, setting the puzzle aside on the nightstand. He didn't sit. He stood stiff near the dresser, arms crossed, posture tight as though bracing for a fight or rehearsing lines he'd been building in his head. "I don't get it," he began, his tone already edged. "It's not like I asked you to hand me cash. I only needed your signature. That's it. You know that, right?" I nodded once. "And you still said no?" "Yes." A bitter laugh slipped out of him. "So you don't trust me." I kept my voice calm steady. "I trust you to be exactly who you are right now. And right now, you're young. You're figuring things out. That means mistakes, and mistakes are fine. They're part of living. But I can't risk what little I have on a loan you may not be ready to handle." He stared at me as though I had spoken a language he'd never heard. "You think I'm irresponsible." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Evan's hand raked through his hair in agitation. "You've been living here rent-free. My mom's the one cooking, cleaning. I do my share," I interrupted, gently but firmly. "I cook. I clean. I feed the cat when you forget. I fold laundry. I buy my own groceries. And if you believe I am a burden, then say it plainly. Don't wrap it up in the word rent." That silenced him. He hadn't expected me to push back. His voice faltered. "I thought you'd help. You always help." I nodded slowly. "I have. When your mother's car broke down, when she needed braces, when your school trip wasn't covered. I helped gladly. But there's a difference between helping and enabling. And if I co-sign this loan, it wouldn't be helping you, it would be endangering us both." His jaw tightened. "So this is punishment." "No, Evan. This is protection. For you, so you don't drown in a debt you can't manage. For me, so I don't lose what little independence I've managed to hold on to." His gaze flicked toward the lamp in the corner, dark unplugged. "Did you pull the plug on that?" he asked. "No," I said softly. He looked away. Silence filled the space, heavy and unsettled. Then, in a quieter voice, "So, what now?" I met his eyes. "Now we go on. You live your choices. I live mine. But don't try to guilt me into decisions that aren't mine to give, not because we share blood, not because of history." He nodded once, stiffly, then left, closing the door harder than necessary. For a long while, I sat motionless, my hand resting on the crossword, pencil hovering above half-filled boxes. Refusing someone you've loved since the day they arrived in this world, it tears something from you. Yet it also returns something, a sliver of yourself long eroded by years of yes. That evening, dinner was a quiet theater. Marissa passed the butter without meeting my eyes. Evan never came down at all. I cleared my plate, rinsed it, and left the kitchen gleaming. No gratitude followed, but I didn't wait for it. In my room, I packed a single box, a rehearsal. Inside, I placed my photo albums, the small keepsake box that held my wedding ring, Julian's letter, a scarf still faint with the scent of lilacs. I taped it shut, slid it beneath the bed. It felt good, solid, like turning a key in a lock, one that led outward instead of in. The next morning, I dialed the bank, not the general number, but the direct line. I asked for Ms. Hanley, the branch manager. Years ago, after Julian passed, she had guided me through closing accounts. Later, when I needed to separate finances from Marissa after my surgery, she had spoken with kindness that didn't carry pity. She remembered me at once. "Mrs. Hale," she said warmly. "How can I help today?" I explained my situation carefully, not the personal ache, only the practical facts. I was preparing to rent a place on my own. I needed to know how much I could draw from savings without penalties and how to arrange automatic payments for rent and utilities. She listened without interruption, then explained each step. "You've been wise," she said. "Frugal, study. With your planning, you'll be comfortable for years, even with rent. Especially with rent that modest." Her reassurance filled me with something I hadn't felt in a long while: confidence. I wrote everything neatly into my notebook and hung up. Then I called Nara. "Yes, the unit is still available," she said, a touch of excitement in her tone. "We just finished the final repairs yesterday. Would you like me to reserve it officially?" I glanced at the sealed box under my bed. "Yes," I said. "Please mark it as taken." "Wonderful. You can bring the deposit and first month's rent this Friday. We'll have the keys waiting." When I hung up, I turned toward the mirror. My reflection startled me. My eyes looked older than I remembered, not merely from years lived, but from holding myself back, from tiptoeing through a house that pretended welcome while quietly pressing me to the edges. I brushed my hair, laced my walking shoes, and stepped outside without a word. 3 blocks away, the little cafe smelled of roasted beans and warm pastries. I ordered something I hadn't indulged in for decades, a hot chocolate crowned with extra whipped cream. I carried it to a sunlit table by the window, wrapped my hands around the cup, and sipped slowly. Not as a guest, not as a burden, but as a woman quietly reclaiming her place in the world. Later that evening, I pulled out my notebook and began a list. Call utility companies, arrange service transfer. Request mail forwarding. Pack essentials first. Inform my doctor of the new address. Leave a note for Marissa or don't. That last line I left blank. Back at the house, the air felt strangely still. Evan was gone. Marissa was upstairs on a work call, her voice carrying faintly through the floorboards. I went straight to my room and began filling box number 2. Books, stationery, my sewing kit, and a small clock Julian once gave me, the one with the inscription etched into the back: "Time is what we share." I wrapped it carefully in a dish towel before setting it inside. That night, a soft knock came at my door, just a few fingers against the wood. "Can we talk?" Marissa asked. I sat on the bed, the half-packed box beside me. "Of course." She stepped in, her gaze sweeping across the tape roll, the empty shelves, the open drawers. "You're leaving?" she asked flatly. "Yes." "When?" "Friday." She stood perfectly still, jaw tight, but her voice stayed level. "So that's it? You just decided?" "I've been thinking about it for weeks. And you didn't tell me. I didn't think you'd be glad for me." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped her. "You twist everything. We gave you a room when you needed one. We tried." "Yes," I said softly. "You gave me a room, but not a place." Her face shifted, almost breaking, but the tears never came. "You think you'll be happier alone?" "I think I'll be freer alone." "That's not the same." She hesitated, then added, "And what about Evan?" "He's still upset." "He'll recover," I said, meeting her eyes. "He's young. He has time to learn that love is not a contract." She didn't respond. She simply turned, closed the door, and left me in silence. That night, I lay awake, not from anxiety, but from relief. It was happening quietly, without shouts or theatrics. Just a decision, carried out by a woman who had given for a lifetime and finally chosen to take something back: her dignity, her space, her peace. By Wednesday, I had begun boxing the last few belongings that still tied me to the room. My nightgown, a crocheted throw I'd made during chemo treatments when my hands shook too much to hold a book, a small tin of buttons that had once belonged to my mother. The rest, the furniture, the mattress, the curtains, had never been mine anyway. Late that morning, Marissa's voice drifted from the hallway, clipped and restrained. "Do you need anything from the store?" I hesitated, then answered, "No, thank you." A pause, then her footsteps retreated. She didn't ask where I was going. She didn't ask why I was packing. Perhaps it was easier for both of us to pretend. Easier to imagine this as just another room being emptied for repainting. Another load for the attic. Around noon, I found an old photograph tucked inside a book I hadn't opened in years. A summer picnic. Marissa no older than 10, Evan still an infant resting in my arms, Julian grinning beside me in that absurd fishing had he always refused to throw away. We sat on a plaid blanket, a jug of lemonade glinting in the sun, all of us touched with a golden light. I held it for a long time, not with sadness, but recognition. That was a good day. That day, we were happy. I slipped the picture into the box labeled Keep Close. That afternoon, I walked to the mailbox and sent 3 envelopes, one to the power company, one to the post office, one to my doctor. All simple notices, change of address effective next week. Please update records accordingly. It felt like shedding an old skin. I didn't tell Marissa I would be gone by Friday morning. I didn't want a scene. Not a rushed apology spoken for appearances, nor a last-minute plea designed to tug at guilt. The truth was, I didn't believe she would stop me. She would watch me go the way one watches bags of clothes being dropped at a thrift shop, conflicted, relieved, faintly guilty. Evan didn't speak to me at all. I heard him come and go, keys jingling, the low growl of the car in the driveway fading into the distance. But it no longer mattered. I was done treating silence as if it carried hidden meaning. That evening, I gave myself a small gift. I wrote a grocery list, not for them, not for what they liked or what they would eat, but for myself. Oatmeal, fresh apples, black tea strong, 1 small jar of strawberry preserves, rye crackers, whole milk, not skim, cocoa mix, simple things, quiet things. I could already picture the cupboards in that little kitchen on Ravenwood Lane, the chipped mugs, the single drawer of silverware, the kettle whistling on a real stove instead of the drone of a microwave. That night, I sat once more by the window, not out of sadness but habit. The streetlight flickered as it always did, painting the driveway in a soft yellow haze. Somewhere across the way, wind chimes swayed in the evening air. And for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't waiting. Not for apologies. Not for change. Not for the past to return. I was already stepping toward something else. I was just sitting. And for once, sitting was enough. 2 more nights. Then the last morning would come, carrying with it a signature on a lease and my hand on a doorknob that opened not into obligation, but into peace. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you hear in the back room of someone else's house, when footsteps above remind you the walls don't belong to you, but a true quiet. A quiet that felt spacious, even in the smallest rooms. Nara placed the keys in my palm with a smile. Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. Welcome home. The keys were cool, unfamiliar, heavy in a way that mattered. I closed my hand around them and nodded. Thank you, I whispered. It's been a long time since something felt like mine. She helped me carry in the first boxes, the ones I'd packed with the most care. Books, linens, 2 ceramic mugs, the photograph of Julian by the lake, his smile wide, his hat pushed back in the sunlight. Nara asked no questions. She simply smiled politely and said, "Take your time settling in. I'm 3 doors down, apartment 3B, if you ever need anything." After she left, I stood in the center of the living room and turned slowly in a circle. The hardwood creaked gently beneath my slippers. The heater clicked alive near the window, humming steady and warm. Outside, the garden stretched in early bloom, green pressing up through dirt with quiet defiance. I placed Julian's photo on the windowsill. Then I opened the cupboard and began setting away groceries I had chosen for myself. My groceries. My choices. There was only one chair, a wooden one with a faded cushion I'd taken from Marissa's kitchen, the chair no one wanted anymore. I set it near the window, boiled water in the kettle, and brewed a cup of tea. It tasted stronger here, not because the leaves were different, but because no one else had touched it. I added a splash of milk, sat down with the cup cradled in both hands, and simply breathed. For the first hour, I unpacked nothing. I only watched the light shift across the floor and let the silence fold around me like an old friend. In the afternoon, I took out my sewing kit, my crossword book, and draped a small throw blanket across the back of the chair. I hung my 2 good dresses in the tiny closet. By evening, the apartment was still half bare, boxes stacked in corners, but it already felt more like home than that back room ever had. I reheated a bowl of lentil soup I had brought in a thermos, ate it at the little fold-out table, unrushed, unobserved. No one asking if I'd added too much salt. When I finished, I washed the bowl, dried it, and placed it neatly in the cupboard. Later, as I changed into my nightgown, the phone rang. I had kept the same number, a small thread of continuity. The caller ID read Marissa. She hadn't called yesterday during the move, not when she found the room emptied and the drawers bare. Now, at 8:40 in the evening, she was calling. I didn't answer. I let it ring until voicemail caught it. The screen blinked. One new message. I didn't listen. I turned the phone face down on the sill and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender. I'd packed them with dried sachets, something I hadn't bothered to do in years. I pulled the covers to my chin and looked out the small square window. Above Ravenwood Lane, the stars were faint but visible, scattered light against the dark. I whispered softly into the room, not expecting reply. I'm here. And it was enough. The next morning, I woke before the sun, my body still tuned to the rhythm of living under another's roof. It expected footsteps outside my door, a television murmuring from downstairs, the clatter of dishes in the sink. But here, there was only stillness. A good stillness. I lay in bed a while, listening to the radiator tick like a contented sigh. Then I rose, wrapped myself in a robe, and brewed real coffee, dark, fragrant, not the bitter instant kind Marissa always bought in bulk. I poured it into my favorite mug and stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp with early spring, sharp with the scent of damp soil and faint with smoke. Across the courtyard, a woman in a thick cardigan was watering violets by her door. She looked up and smiled. New neighbor, she called gently. Yes, I said, lifting my mug. Moved in yesterday. Welcome. I'm Rita in 2A. We've got a walking group on Thursdays, if you'd like to join. Thank you, I replied. I just might. She gave a little wave and turned back to her flowers. I lingered outside for another minute, sipping coffee, watching a squirrel race along the fence before going back in. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that belonged only to me. I picked up my phone from the windowsill and pressed play on the voicemail. Marissa's voice filled the room. Mom, she stopped, exhaled too quickly. I saw your room. I guess this is real. A pause. I could hear her trying to steady her breath, trying not to sound afraid. I don't know what you want me to say. Evan's upset. I'm upset. It just feels like you disappeared without a word. Another pause, heavier this time. I wish you'd at least told me where you were going. The message ended. I set the phone down, face up this time, and looked out the window. The light was breaking across the garden, touching the grass with gold. For the first time in years, I felt no need to explain myself. I was exactly where I needed to be. Click. No apology. No questions about whether I was safe, or if I had enough money, or whether I needed help moving. Only that they were upset that my leaving had inconvenienced them. I deleted the voicemail, not in anger, but in clarity. By noon, I had unpacked everything but one final box. The one that held the old photograph albums and Julian's letter. I carried it into the bedroom and slid it beneath the bed. Some things didn't need to be revisited yet. Some memories could rest, undisturbed, until I was ready. After lunch, I walked to the corner market 3 blocks down. The air smelled faintly of rain on pavement. Inside, I chose a bunch of tulips, yellow, always my favorite. The clerk, a teenager with chipped purple polish on her nails, wrapped them carefully. Someone special, she asked with a smile. Yes, I answered. Me. Back home, I placed the tulips in a glass jar and set them on the table. The bright petals leaned toward the lamp as though they'd been waiting all along. Later that evening, just as I finished a bowl of soup, the phone rang again. Evan's name glowed on the screen. I let it ring. 5 times. 6. Then silence. I didn't check the voicemail. I didn't need to. I already knew the shape of his words. Instead, I pulled the Afghan over my legs, switched on the little radio I'd carried with me, and found a classical station playing something soft, sweeping. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill the room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. No one could intrude on my silence, claim it, or twist it into guilt. No one could demand my signature, my presence, my compliance. This space was mine. The quiet, the warmth, the small yellow tulips bending toward the glow. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't have a grand plan beyond the next cup of tea. But for tonight, I had enough. The first night in my new apartment felt like a slow exhale. The second felt like stillness. But the third, yes, the third felt like arrival. That morning, I made pancakes for one. I used real butter, sliced an apple, and let the radio play an old, lilting melody. I didn't miss the chatter of a household I never truly belonged to. I didn't miss being tiptoed around or ignored altogether. I didn't even miss the sound of footsteps beyond my door. After breakfast, I opened my notebook and wrote 3 simple words: I am home. I don't know why writing them mattered so much. Maybe because I had spent so many years as a guest in someone else's life. Even before moving into Marissa's house, I had floated from medical appointments to Evan's school concerts to holidays where my presence was tolerated, needed, but never invited. Now I had a front door that locked from the inside, a cupboard where nothing vanished overnight, a hook where my robe hung without being shoved aside. And I had space, quiet, unfilled, unclaimed space. That afternoon, I walked to the library. I signed up for a new card and checked out 2 books. One on herb gardening, another about women who reinvented themselves after 70. I carried them to a park bench, buttoned my coat against the chill, and read for over an hour with the sun warming my face. It felt decadent, almost, to sit with a book and no one expecting me elsewhere. When I returned, a folded note waited beneath my door. Handwritten in neat script, Mrs. Hale, if you ever feel like joining for tea, we gather on Wednesdays at 4 in the garden. Just a few neighbors. Rita, I smiled and placed it on the fridge with a magnet Julian had once made in his workshop, a bent horseshoe shaped into a heart. That evening, I lit a candle for the first time in years. A small act, but meaningful. The flame painted the walls in warm orange as I prepared dinner, soup, toast, and a dish of olives. Marissa always said olives smelled like old furniture. I liked that smell. Halfway through eating, the phone rang again. This time, an unfamiliar number. I answered. Grandma? Evan's voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it. Yes. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I am, I said. I'm well. A pause. His breath snagged. Where are you living? Not far. Still in town. You didn't tell us. No, I agreed. Why not? Because you didn't ask, I said gently. Not really. You were angry when I said no. You weren't interested in where I might go, only that I left. He fell silent. I'm not saying this to punish you, I added softly. I'm saying it so you understand. Sometimes people leave not from anger, but from necessity. He tried again, stumbling. I didn't mean to make you didn't make me feel anything, Evan. I'd felt that way for years. I just finally acted on it. Silence again, heavier this time. Then, almost a whisper, can I see you? Not yet, I said. Maybe soon. But not yet. Okay. His voice was so small, I closed my eyes just to bear it. I'm not angry with you, I told him. But I need to be here now. I need to be mine. Okay, Grandma. The line went quiet. After he hung up, I sat at the table a long while. The soup had cooled. The candle burned low. I wasn't crying. I wasn't broken. I was steady. And for the first time in decades, I was entirely my own. I felt whole, maybe for the first time in decades. This little apartment, with its crooked drawer and chipped counter tile, had become the place where I returned to myself. A place where silence was not punishment, where light stayed on as long as I chose. Whatever came next, I knew this much. I would never again live in a house where the door to my peace was controlled by someone else's mood. On Thursday morning, I went to see my lawyer. Francine Daly, a sturdy woman in her 60s with gray hair braided neatly down her back, had been guiding me since Julian passed. She was the one who helped me settle his estate, rewrite my will, and navigate the language of forms I never wanted to learn. When I walked into her office, Francine looked up from her desk and gave me a slow, knowing nod. "Well," she said, "I was wondering when you'd come." "I need to make some changes," I told her, settling into the chair across from her. "I've moved." She folded her hands. "I heard Marissa left you a message." She sounded concerned. "I imagine she's more surprised than concerned," I said evenly. Francine raised one brow. "She also asked if your accounts were still in your name." "That doesn't surprise me." I leaned forward. "I'd like to review my directives. And I need to update my will." Francine gave a small smile, sharp but kind. "Then let's get to it." For the next hour, we went through documents line by line. I removed Marissa as primary beneficiary, not out of spite, but out of recognition. She would treat my savings as a resource, not a legacy. Instead, I named a local scholarship fund that supported women over 40 returning to school. Education had shifted my path once, briefly, before I had to step away to care for my father. I wanted someone else to get her second chance. I also arranged a small trust for Evan, a stipend that would begin when he turned 25, but only if he had completed training or schooling of some kind. Not punishment, but structure. A foundation he could stand on when I no longer could. Lastly, I asked that my belongings, my books, jewelry, and quilts, be donated to a shelter for women starting over after leaving broken homes. When we finished, Francine printed the new will and slid it across the desk. "Still sure?" she asked. "Completely." She studied me for a moment, then leaned back, folding her hands again. "You look lighter, Rosalind." "Happier." "I am." As I left her office, I passed a florist on the corner and stopped for a single daffodil. Yellow, the color of beginnings. I carried it home in one hand and placed it in a jar beside Julian's photograph. The light caught his smile just right. That evening, I boiled pasta, opened a bottle of red wine I had been saving without reason, and toasted quietly into the air. To freedom, to clarity, to late decisions that still mattered. The phone rang as I finished my meal. Marissa again. This time, I let it play to voicemail and then listened. "Mom, I don't know what to say. You just left. Evan's confused. I'm confused. I'm trying to be respectful, but I don't understand what I did wrong." Her voice cracked, but still, there was no apology. Just confusion, wrapped in self-pity. She wasn't ready to see it. Maybe she never would. And that was all right. I wasn't living this life for her understanding. I was living it because I had spent too many years pretending I didn't need a life of my own. Later, I curled up in my chair, blanket over my shoulders, book in my lap. Outside, rain tapped softly at the window. Inside, the daffodil bent its head gently in the lamplight. No interruptions. No slammed doors. No voices raised down the hall. Only the rhythm of my own breath, steady and quiet. My own roof. My own name on the papers. My own life. Not loud. Not large. But fully mine. On Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Not a delivery. Not a neighbor. Evan. I saw him through the peephole, his tall frame hunched slightly, shifting from one foot to the other. His usual swagger was gone. His shoulders sloped, his hands buried deep in the pocket of his hoodie. He looked like someone who had just realized how many bridges he'd set aflame in one walk. I opened the door. "Hi, Grandma." His voice was small. The last time I'd seen him, his words had been sharp, his face twisted in anger. Now he seemed older, though not in years. Older in the way regret makes you carry yourself. I stepped back. "You can come in, but only if you're ready to talk like an adult." He nodded once. "I am." He stepped into the apartment and looked around the narrow space, the single chair by the window, the fading tulips still leaning toward the light. He didn't say anything about the size or the modesty of it. Perhaps he knew better. "I like it here," he said finally. "So do I." I motioned to the small table. He sat, and I poured us both tea. For a while, we were quiet. Only the soft clink of spoons against cups filled the room. Then, with effort, he said, "I didn't come to ask for anything." "That's good," I replied, gently but firmly. "I just wanted to see you." "I've been thinking a lot." I nodded, waiting. "You were right. Evan said after a pause. About the loan. About me not being ready. I got denied anyway, even with someone else. I didn't gloat. This wasn't the moment for it. I'm sorry, he added. Not just about the loan. About everything. About how I spoke to you. About acting like you owed me something. His hands trembled slightly as he held the cup of tea. I couldn't tell whether it was nerves or shame. Maybe both. You didn't just act entitled, Evan, I said quietly. You acted like I stopped being a person the moment I said no. He winced. I know. I raised your mother to be strong, to survive without leaning too heavily on anyone. But somewhere along the way, she taught you that needing meant taking, and I let that happen. I played along. For the first time in a long while, he really looked at me. You were always there, he said. Every school trip, every birthday, even when Mom forgot. I guess I took that for granted. Yes, I replied softly. You did. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted with truth. I started a job at the repair shop on Brookside, he said finally. Not what I pictured doing, but it's something. I nodded. Honest work is never the wrong choice. I wanted you to know I'm trying. I believe you, I said. Trying is a good start. But trust doesn't come back overnight, Evan. You understand that, don't you? I do. He lowered his gaze to his tea, then added, Mom doesn't understand. She thinks you're punishing us. I'm not, I said. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. He gave me a small, almost sheepish smile. I didn't know there was a difference until now. I reached across the table, laying my hand gently over his. Evan, I don't stop loving people just because they hurt me. But I do start choosing what kind of love I can give and what kind I no longer have to. He didn't cry, but I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes blinked too fast. Can I come again? He asked. Yes, I said. But only when you want to visit me, not when you want something. I understand. He stood, took one last look around my little apartment, then bent and hugged me. Not the rushed, obligatory kind, but the kind he used to give as a boy whole, trusting as though I could fix everything again. He didn't linger. He didn't overreach. And when he left, I wasn't drained. I was hopeful. That night, I lit another candle. Lavender this time, slow burning. I curled into my chair with a blanket over my knees, sipping cocoa as the street outside fell quiet. And for the first time in years, I believed something I had never dared before. Leaving hadn't ended love. It had begun self-respect. 3 days later, there was another knock at my door. I was watering the small herbs I'd started on the windowsill, basil, rosemary, a little pot of chives. The knock wasn't hurried or tentative, just 3 steady raps. I looked through the peephole. Marissa. She stood with her arms crossed, coat buttoned high, her mouth set in the tight line I knew too well. I opened the door halfway. Marissa. Hi, Mom. Her face didn't soften. Can I come in? I stepped back slowly. She entered, standing in the center of my apartment like a guest inspecting a room they hadn't reserved. Not hostile, but not at ease. It's smaller than I expected, she said. It's enough, I replied. She turned toward me. Why didn't you tell me? I did in 100 quiet ways. You just chose not to hear. She flinched almost imperceptibly. Evan said he came by, she murmured. He did. She nodded, then drifted around the room, fingertips brushing the edge of the table, the back of the chair. She stopped at the windowsill, eyes lingering on Julian's photograph. I didn't think you'd actually leave, she said softly. I thought you were upset, but that you'd calm down. I wasn't angry, Marissa, I said gently. I was done. She looked at me then, and for the briefest moment I saw the child she used to be, the one who crawled into bed during thunderstorms, the one who cried over scraped knees until my kiss made it better. You raised me to be strong, she said. But sometimes I think I mistook strong for hard. Yes, I said. You did. She lowered herself into the chair as though it might not bear the weight of her regret. I didn't know how to help you when you moved in, she admitted. I didn't know how to make space for you without losing my own. I never asked you to lose anything, I replied gently. I only asked for room to breathe. Her hands twisted in her lap. I thought I was helping. I told myself I was, but I started to resent it. And I let Evan speak to you in ways he never should have. I let myself believe you owed us. I gave you years, I said quietly. My time, my money, my patience. But the moment I stopped giving, the door began to close. I know, she whispered. And I hate that I didn't see it until you were gone. We sat in silence, the heater humming softly, filling the room with its steady warmth. Finally, she said, I'm not here to ask you to come back. I know better. I nodded. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. It wasn't a dramatic apology. No tears, no pleading. Just 5 words that had taken her far too long to reach. I accept that, I said. But I'm not coming back. That house stopped being mine a long time ago. She nodded, stood, and moved toward the door. Then she turned, her voice quieter. Can we start over from here? I studied her. Not the little girl I once raised, not the cold woman in the kitchen months ago, just my daughter, trying, maybe for the first time, to speak without defense. We can start something, I said, but not over. This isn't back to before. This is forward. Her shoulders eased. The hard line of her mouth softened. All right, she murmured. Her hand rested on the door handle. Do you need anything? No, I said. But thank you for asking. She opened the door and left it gently closed behind her. Not slammed, not half shut. Just closed. And in its place, stillness again. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that makes room. The season shifted without ceremony. Spring folded into early summer, and the garden out back burst alive with colors I didn't have names for. Rita brought me a cutting from her lilac bush, and we planted it just beneath my window. It'll root quickly, she said. By next year it will be full and fragrant. Like me, I thought, though I didn't say it aloud. Patient, but strong. I joined a Wednesday tea circle. There were 4 of us at first, all women in our 60s and beyond, each carrying stories we never rushed to tell. We spoke of books, neighbors, the aches in our joints, and recipes half forgotten. Beneath it all was a quiet sisterhood. No explanations needed. No one asked why I had moved. They simply slid a chair out for me and passed the sugar bowl. The rest of my days were simple. I read. I cooked. I walked to the market once a week and bought only what I wanted. I bought myself a small radio with a handle, like the one Julian and I used to carry to picnics. One Sunday afternoon, I set it on the porch, listening as Billie Holiday's voice floated low and slow through the speakers while sparrows darted through the hedges. That was the day I let myself cry. Not sharp grief. Not anger. Just long, steady tears for all the years I had carried too much, years of being needed without being seen, of loving in silence, of waiting in darkened rooms for kindness that never came. I cried because I had survived it, and because now I had this. Not perfection, not endless joy, but space. Dignity. Light that stayed on as long as I wanted it to. Marissa called sometimes, not often, just enough. The conversations were careful, tentative, but better. She didn't ask when I'd visit. She didn't press about the past. Once she told me, Evan's changed since he saw you. He started showing up on time, bought a secondhand car with his own name on the papers. I didn't say much, just nodded and told her I was glad. And I was. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. Folded in half, plain envelope. Evan's handwriting. Dear Grandma, I think about you every time I check my bank balance before I swipe my card. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes being told no can save your future. Love, Evan. I slipped it into the drawer where Julian's old note still rested. 2 different kinds of love, both earned. The apartment felt more lived in now. My books filled the shelf. The chives had overrun their pot. The daffodil was gone, replaced by a small clay dish of dried lavender. One afternoon, as I folded laundry, I thought back to that night when the light in my old room went out. How I had laid there in the dark, more numb than afraid. And I smiled, not from bitterness, but from clarity. That darkness had shown me everything. It showed me how little power I truly had in that house, and how much I still held when I finally chose to leave it. I didn't need a grand ending. No grandchild collapsing at my feet in apology. No daughter transformed by guilt. I just needed a place where my yes meant something, and where my no didn't cost me the roof over my head. And now I had it. Last week, I hung a wind chime outside my window. Simple 5 hollow tubes and a wooden heart in the center. It doesn't make much sound unless the breeze is right. But when it does, it sings softly, like something remembering its own voice. That's what this place has been for me. Not a retreat. Not an escape. A remembering. I remembered what it feels like to be seen as a whole person. Not a background figure in someone else's story. Not a placeholder. Not an obligation. Just a woman who has lived long enough to know when love begins to look like debt and when silence begins to feel like exile. I've made peace with the fact that Marissa and I may never be close again, not as we once were. But we speak carefully now, with fewer landmines between us. And for me, that is enough. Marissa sends photos sometimes, Evan at work in his shop uniform, the cat curled on the porch rail, the garden she planted this year without my hands in the soil. They're learning to live without me. And I'm learning too. I was never meant to disappear simply because I was no longer needed. Last night, Rita invited me for supper. She made soup, and we sat on her back patio while the sky softened into dusk. At one point, she looked at me with those steady eyes and said something I've carried with me since. You know, a lot of women our age believe their story has already been lived, that everything after this is just waiting. But I think this part, this choosing yourself, might be the best chapter yet. I nodded because I knew she was right. For so long, I lived inside other people's needs. I had forgotten what it felt like to build a life without asking permission. Now, each morning, I open the window and let the air in. I water the herbs on the sill. I read in the quiet. I shop for my own groceries from my own list. And no one turns out the light when I disagree. When the breeze comes and the wind chime stirs, I remember. This is mine. This time. This space. This peace. And if you're reading this, and something in your own life feels like a slow erasing, if your presence is only tolerated, if your silence has been mistaken for consent, I want you to know this. You are not too old to begin again. You are not too late to guard your dignity. You are not selfish for saying enough. If you've ever been made to feel that your no is betrayal, remember this. Your peace is not a luxury. It is your right. And it is never too late to claim it. Sweetheart, don't forget to subscribe and leave me a little note in the comments. I love hearing from you.